Hello everyone. So today we will be discussing about Raghav Chadha's speech on budget 2026-2027. He titled it The Good, the Bad and the Way Forward. First we will be looking into the context of what Raghav Chadha said and why does the budget 2026-2027 matter to us? What are the key questions he raised in the parliament on budget 2026 and 2027? Who Raghav Chadha is? Raghav Chadha is an MP from Aam Aadmi Party representing Punjab. By profession, he is a chartered accountant and he's known for data-driven analytical speeches in Parliament, one of the youngest MPs in Rajya Sabha. First, under subheading The Good, what Raghav Chadha appreciated we will discuss. First thing that he appreciated is increase in STT. STT stands for Securities Transaction Tax on derivative trading. Curbing reckless speculations. So increase in STT, it protects the retail investors, 90% of whom lose money in futures and options trading. So most people, 90% of the people trading in the securities exchange market are mostly not really have knowledge about how speculations happen. They only focus on what profits they earn. So raising in STT, that is tax on trading, it protects the investors who don't really have knowledge, and by increasing the cost of these trades, the hike acts as a deterrent to impulsive and speculative behavior that often leads to significant financial ruin for middle class families. Deterrent is barrier, okay? And then market stability. Excessive speculations turns the stock market into a gambling den. Mostly what happens is many people purchase shares together, because of which there is a sudden hike in the market, and then they together sell the shares that they hold, which immediately lets the market completely fall. So in that case, it will turn into a gambling den. So higher STT helps filter out low conviction, high frequency trades, potentially reducing extreme market volatility. The double taxation. So previously the securities exchange market was taxed once in the name of STT, but now even the long-term capital gains, also known as LTCG, on it also they started taxing, which will become disincentive, is what Raghav Chadha mentioned. He argued that since the government is already collecting an upfront toll through higher STT, it should abolish the long-term capital gains tax for individual investors to reward those who invest for the long term rather than just that they speculate. And next point he raised is rise in capital expenditure. This is also something that he appreciated. He highlighted the sharp rise in capital expenditure, rising from 3 lakh crore in financial year 2018 to 22 to nearly rupees 12 lakh crore as a positive infrastructure multiplier. He also noted that this expenditure represents approximately 4.4% of GDP. GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product. And then he advocated for a 5-year sector-wise roadmap and recommended providing rupees 1.5 lakh crore in matching grants to states to enhance infrastructure development. And then the third thing that he appreciated from the budget is easing of NRI investment limits. He welcomed the liberalization of NRI investment limits, specifically doubling of individual capitals from 5% to 10%. So what happens is, in the market, or specifically in the Indian market, even non-residential Indians from foreign can also invest or purchase the shares in the Indian share market. So previously there was a barrier that an NRI who purchases shares from the foreign can only purchase up to 5% of the shares out of 100%. But now it is doubled, and an individual investor from foreign can purchase shares up to 10% of the total of 100%, and the group limit raised from 10% to 24%. It becomes easier for NRIs to invest directly in the stock market through the portfolio investment scheme without having to go through complex middleman structures. Previously what used to happen is, for people or NRIs who actually wanted to invest in the share market, they could only do up to 5% of the shares. So what they used to do is, they used to go through middlemen. They used to put this middleman in the middle, and then they used to ask on behalf of them to purchase. So This middleman used to purchase shares on behalf of the NRI individual investors who wanted to, let it be individual or group investors who wanted to purchase shares. So they used to purchase only 5% and remaining number of shares were purchased by the middlemen on behalf of those NRIs. We will ease in that way also. And also he noted that there are roughly 32 million NRIs globally. By raising the government is making it easier for them to bring their savings back to India and invest in Indian businesses. Unlike foreign institutional investors who often pull their money out quickly when global market gets shaky, NRIs are considered patient capital. But why is the other money leaving? He pointed out that these limits were only raised after foreign investors pulled out nearly $23 million from India in the previous year. So he just says that before they pulled out their money, the government should have woken up and pointed out or made some solutions to let the money be in the country. But anyways, we have to also focus on why the money is leaving and where the money is going and where is the other spot that it is being invested. And the fourth point that Raghav Chadha appreciated from the budget is no election driven promises. He praised the financial minister for exercising relative restraint regarding election bound states. No budgetary bribery. Okay, this is something that happens in many states just before the elections, that they are just given promises regarding particular projects, particular bridges or particular developments and stuff that will not happen from now on. Typically in years of major states are heading to assembly elections, government often fills the budget with populist schemes like freebies, cash transfers or massive local projects, specifically for those states to win over voters. He noted that this budget avoided such localized SOPs. Nation first approach. The government focused more on national infrastructure like the 12 crore capital expenditure that we discussed previously, rather than trying to please specific regional voting blocks. He argued that a union budget should be a long-term national exercise, not a short-term political tool to win. Because the promises are made just before the elections and then they win voters and then nothing really happens. So that can be avoided through this approach. And then strengthening of federalism. He viewed this lack of targeted promises as a sign of physical discipline. Instead of buying votes in 2 to 3 specific states, he suggested the money to be distributed more fairly across all states through matching grants rather than just loans to help every state grow regardless whether they have an upcoming election or not. So what happens is, what is the difference between grant and a loan is, grant is not repayable. It's more like you are just giving money so that they can spend within their state and develop the infrastructure within, which creates jobs and which creates more income. And then the bad, what Raghav Chadha criticized, the concerns he raised. First one is heavy tax burden on middle class. He described the middle class as a sandwich class that is being squeezed between the poor who receive the government subsidies and the rich who benefit from corporate tax cuts and debt waivers. Disappropriate tax burden. He pointed out a significant shift in India's tax structure, noting that for the first time, personal income tax collections, approximately rupees 11 lakh crore, have surpassed corporate tax collections, approximately rupees 9.8 lakh crore, which is a disincentive for the middle class. He argued it is unfair that individual salaried professionals are contributing more to the national exchequer than the billion-dollar corporations. Stagnant incomes versus rising costs. He highlighted that while salaries for the middle class have remained largely stagnant, the cost of living has risen sharply due to inflation, cited as 6.8%. He provided a specific data on rising household expenses. Healthcare is increased by 9%, education is increased by 8%, rent is increased by 7%, food is increased by 6%, transport is increased by 5%. The golden egg analogy. So the people who contribute more to the income tax within the country are mostly middle class salaried employees, and it's not really the poor and it's not really the rich, because rich benefit from tax cuts and debt waivers, and poor benefit from subsidies, but middle class, they don't really have something as incentive. It's only that they are going on paying, but they're not really getting anything in return. That's what he described in the golden egg analogy. He compared the middle class to a hen that lays golden eggs, which the government continues to squeeze without providing any relief or incentive to keep it healthy or productive. He noted that the middle class pays for everything from GST on basic items like notebooks and medicines to tolls on highways, but receives almost no direct welfare benefits in return. Second point is the 16% decline in real wages. Real wages is the salary that one shows is not the actual salary. The real wage is, a person's income that is received after tax cuts. Okay, that is known as his real income, and that real income is spent on necessities or anything that one wants to purchase. He used the 16% decline in real wages to argue that the middle class is suffering from a silent pay cut. He stated that between financial year 2018 and financial year 2026, the real income of salaried Indians dropped by nearly 16%. He also highlighted that unlike government employees who receive dearness allowance to offset inflation, private sector and gig workers have no such legal protection. He argued that while real wages fell, the government continued to collect high taxes with personal income tax. To stop this decline, he proposed an inflation-linked salary revision act. This law would require employers to adjust wages automatically based on how the annual inflation rate, similar to how bank loans are linked to a repo rate. What repo rate means is, a bank when it gets bankrupt, or we call it when one bank's balance becomes nil, it takes loan from the central bank. In India, it is RBI, Reserve Bank of India. It takes loan, and at what percentage? There is some percentage of interest on which the central bank gives loan to the regional bank or a private bank. That particular percentage of interest is known as repo rate. There is also another term that is known as reverse repo rate, in which when the central bank gets or has nil balances, that is when it borrows money from the private banks or regional banks, and there is on an interest, and that in that case reverse repo rate it is called. And then healthcare underfund. He pointed out that while the National Health Policy 2017 committed India to spending 2.5% of its GDP on public health, the current allocation remains stagnant at approximately 0.5% of GDP. He noted that in the budget 2026, health received roughly rupees 1 lakh crore, which is only about 2% of total government GDP it is. So he pointed out that in 2017, National Health Policy stated that minimum of 2.5% of GDP should be dedicated to healthcare. But in this year's budget for healthcare, it was only allotted 2%, which is cut by 0.5% of what was committed in National Health Policy 2017. He compared India's low health spending to other nations to highlight the structural failure of the budget. USA has assigned 18% of its GDP for healthcare. Germany has assigned 13% of its GDP for healthcare. UK has assigned 12% of its GDP for healthcare. Japan and Spain have allotted 10% of its GDP for healthcare. He argued that low funding leads to visible decay in infrastructure characterized by understaffed hospitals, overworked doctors, and a severe shortage of beds, resource scarcity, a lack of essential diagnostic machines and medicines in government facilities, a debt emergency because public hospitals have long waiting lists or lack equipment. Families are forced to turn to excruciatingly expensive private hospitals. He stated that for a middle class family, one major health emergency often results in a lifelong debt. He proposed a new vision called One Nation, One Medical Treatment, arguing that the quality of healthcare should not be determined by a person's income or geographic location. He demanded that the government move toward a system where every citizen has access to the same high quality care regardless of their status. He also criticized the 18% GST on health insurance, arguing that protecting one's health is a fundamental necessity, not a luxury. In other countries, what happens is many people, let it be rich or poor, they mostly prefer government hospitals because highly qualified doctors and highly qualified nurses and everything the best way possible. So he wants such kind of implementation in India too. And hidden debt or lack of transparency. He argued that the government is masking the true extent if India's financial liabilities to present a healthier than actual economic picture. He accused the government of hiding a massive 17.3 lakh crore in debt. He explained that while the official debt to GDP ratio is cited as 56.1%, he excludes borrowing by government-backed entities like FCI, Food Corporation of India for food subsidies, NHAI, National Highway Authority of India for road construction, OMC bonds, debt incurred by the oil marketing companies. He claimed that if these quasi-fiscal instruments were included, the real GDP would jump to nearly 60% of the GDP. He warned that the government has shifted its fiscal benchmarks to allow more borrowing. Old rule was capped fresh borrowing at roughly 3% of GDP. Old rule says that, for example, if the GDP of the current year is 1000 rupees and previous debt is about 100 rupees, a new debt can be taken by the country up to 3% of its new GDP, which is rupees 1000. So 3% of rupees 1000 would be 30 rupees. If I have a previous debt in the belonging from previous years of rupees 100 rupees, this year I can take more 3%, more 30 rupees debt from other countries, which is fine. But new approach says that allows borrowing if the total debt stays under 50% of GDP. Previously, only I could have taken up to 130 rupees of debt, but now I can take up to 500 rupees of debt, which is a huge transformation and which is very bad for the country. He said that we should focus on reducing the debt of the country, not on increasing the debt of the country. He argued this manipulation uses optimistic GDP growth assumptions to justify taking on more debt, leading to what he called a slow motion fiscal collapse. He demanded clarity on where the middle class hard-earned money is going. Despite this record contribution, there is no clear sector-wise roadmap for how the increased capital expenditure will benefit the common taxpayer directly. He also flagged a lack of transparency in the banking sector, exposing that Indian banks quietly collected nearly rupees 19,000 crore over 3 years on minimum balance penalties, calling it a hidden tax. This is something which is missed out by almost all of us, the hidden tax. He also pointed out something that we don't really notice. Way forward, Raghav Chadha's suggestions by which we can really focus on developing the country. First thing is make LTCG nil for individual investors, that we discussed in positives that he said. LTCG is long-term capital gains. We discussed about double taxation, that is what he mentioned. That long-term capital gains should not be taxed as if it was in previous years. Inflation-linked salary revision act. A proposal legally mandate that private and formal sector wages automatically adjust to the annual inflation rate, protecting the 16% decline in real wages, linking the minimum wage directly to inflation to ensure that even the lowest paid formal workers maintain their standard of living. Matching grants for state capital X. He claims to transfer states from borrowers to builders by intensivizing infrastructure development without adding to their debt. This is grants. His suggestion includes 1:1 matching grant. He proposed that for every rupees 1 a state government spends on capital expenditure, asset creation, the central government should provide a matching grant of rupees 1. Grant, not a loan. He emphasized that this funding must be provided as a grant based on trust rather than the current system of conditional loans, which he argues only adds to the balance sheet stress to states. So what he said is, by giving grants, what happens is, as I told you, 3% of new debt can be taken either by the country or by the state. So when you give 1% more to the state, no, without taking any, when more 1% is assigned as a grant, not a loan, no, they can spend more 1% on building their infrastructure, which would of course give employment, by which more tax can be collected and the GDP of the country eventually increases. Rupees 1.5 lakh crore allocation. He argued the center to allocate this amount over a 5-year period to establish a dedicated grant pool that states can tap into for high impact infrastructure projects. Multiplier effect on GDP. He emphasized that capital expenditure is a powerful growth engine. For every rupees 1 invested in assets, typically generates a rupees 2 to rupees 3 increase in GDP over a 3 to 5 year horizon. Sectoral focus. The grants are intended to help states independently fund critical sectors such as irrigation and power to modernize rural infrastructure and ensure energy security. Urban assets. Building sustainable cities, sanitation systems, and clean drinking water networks. Connectivity. Expanding the state highways and local road networks to boost trade and mobility. Strengthening corporative federalism. By replacing restrictive conditional loans with the trust-based grants, he argued the center could empower than being limited by strict 3% borrowing caps. Job creation. He noted that the massive push in state-level infrastructure would serve as a primary driver for local employment, helping absorb the growth workforce in both rural and urban areas. Digital recognition of virtual digital assets. What happens is, virtual digital assets refer to mostly crypto coins and other coins. What happens is, when you earn a profit of crypto coins, now on profit 30% of it is collected as a tax, but there are not really any specific rules for digital virtual market in India, and there are no specific regulations for them in India, because of which people think it is more of a fraud. Okay, the taxed but not protected problem. He mentioned the government takes a 30% tax on your crypto profits, treating it as a legal income, but it hasn't passed a law to protect you if you get scammed, treating it as if it is illegal. His suggestion is, if you tax, you must legally recognize and protect the people trading it. Treat them as a digital gold, not money. He suggested that India should stop worrying about people using crypto to buy groceries. Instead, the law should recognize them as asset, like owning a piece of gold or share in a company. His suggestion: give them formal asset class status so they can be regulated by agencies like SEBI. SEBI stands for Security Exchange Board of India. Stop the brain drain. He noted that because India's laws are unclear, thousands of young tech experts and billions of dollars are moving to places like Dubai and Singapore. His suggestion is, by giving virtual assets legal recognition, India can keep these smart developers and the tax money here at home. Regulate, not ban. He famously said, prohibition is not protection, regulation is protection. He argued that banning virtual assets just drives them underground where criminals operate. His suggestion is, set clear rules. KYC, anti-money laundering, so the bad actors are caught and honest investors are safe. By legalizing this, there is also one more advantage, that people think assets like gold and land give them good returns, but such people, when the virtual digital assets are legalized and are given proper regulations and rules, many people will shift their purchasing of assets of gold and land to purchasing of shares in company or investing in securities market, which will benefit the country. Blockchain based land registry is the fifth suggestion he gave. By proposal for a national blockchain property register, he aims to fix India's utterly chaotic land record system by replacing manual, paper based files with a tamper proof digital ledger. This one is core technology, a digital log. Tamper proof ledger. Unlike traditional registries where people can be lost, forged, or quietly altered, a blockchain registry is immutable. Once a transaction, sale, gift, or inheritance is recorded, it cannot be changed secretly. Timestamping. Every entry is marked with an exact date and time, creating a permanent sequential audit trail of ownership from the very first owner to the current one. Solving land record chaos. 66% of all civil disputes in India are related to land. 45% of properties currently lack a clear verified title. 7 years average. This is how long it currently takes Indian civil courts to resolve a single property dispute. Benefits for the common citizen. Instant verification. Instead of waiting 4 to 6 months to verify a property deed at a registrar's office, buyers could verify titles instantly online. Eliminating middlemen. This system would reduce dependency on dalals, middlemen who often exploit the complexity of current paperwork. Unlock wealth. Clear titles would allow middle class families to easily use their property as collateral for bank at lower interest rates. So what happens is these middlemen, especially the ones that are mentioned, actually sell a land to two parties. Okay, so they will not really realize it until the very end moment and almost fight for the land because both of them paid legally, but the illegal selling of land was done by middlemen, which the case is taken to the court and then it is argued for years and years and years. It still keeps going. 7-year average is just an average. It takes more time in this country for land disputes to be resolved. So by this technique that Raghav Chadha mentioned, we can actually solve the major problem in the country India. Implementation strategy. Initial focus. He suggested starting with the top 10 major states, focusing first on metropolitan and tier 2 cities. Digitalization goal. He noted that 6.2 crore property documents are still pending digitization and should be moved directly onto the blockchain to prevent further corruption. Global proof of concept. He urged India to follow the lead countries like Sweden, Georgia, and the UAE, United Arab Emirates, where blockchain has already made property transactions near instant and reduced dispute rates to below 2%. Thank you so much for hearing until here. So I just feel like when Raghav Chadha really gives some speeches, the Gen Z or Instagram users mostly know about what kind of profit they are getting, or just like how the samosas and chai prices were reduced in the airport, they just focus on these things. But as a CA student, I felt it is very important for every single citizen in the country to understand what is really happening with them and what they should really focus on. And especially this speech, I felt it is so much more knowledgeable than one can ever have. Just hope whoever is listening to this, may you forward this speech to everyone that I wanted to explain. I made this presentation just because every citizen in this country, in my country, can understand what is really happening and what kind of things can be done just to improve the country. I just hope that every one of you understood what I really wanted to explain and what I really wanted to present. I hope the presentation is very easy to understand. And if you really have some doubts, you can just comment below. If you really want this explanation in other languages, I can do that too. Yeah, thank you.